Hi, here we are looking at my 31 Buick 90 series. I thought we'd go into more detail about the engine. These are unusual engines for the younger people. For the old timers, they'll probably understand a lot of what's in here already, but I thought I'd just point out some of the features of it. Now, it is a straight 8 engine, and it's 104 horsepower. This was the first year for the straight 8. And the other years they had 6 cylinders. And 30, the 6 cylinder made 98 horsepower. So actually we've only increased the horsepower by 6 by making an 8 cylinder instead of a 6 cylinder. The reason why Buick went to the 8 cylinder was because 8 cylinder cars were becoming very popular. In fact, a lot of cars were going to 12, 16 cylinders, and they were competing in the market with Packard and Cadillac and LaSalle. So for sales aspect, they wanted to put in all 8 cylinders, and they did that through all their models, to their smaller models. Except, you know, when they got to the really low-end cars that weren't the Buick but the Marquette. Now, let's see. This is overhead valve, so this is the valve cover, and then this is the head here. Now, this plate here covers the spark plugs. Now, on a lot of cars, it's hard to find the spark plug cover on the engine because a lot of them were eliminated, and I think part of that was because they didn't want to bother putting the cover back on the spark plugs. Also, it kind of traps heat in that area, and if you have an overheating problem, that probably was just easy just to take that off, and you'd have better circulation around the hot head. This here is where you put the oil in. Fill it up here, and it takes 9 quarts of oil. This here is an oil cooler. When they went from the 6 to the 8, they didn't put as many bearings in it as they would have liked to, and so to compensate for that, they went with an oil cooler. Now this engine is 344 cubic inch roughly, and the pistons are around 3 inches, and the stroke is about 5 inches. Down here is where the water pump is, which is unusual, but back then it was quite a common practice to have a separate water pump instead of having it built into the block. And then as you can see, there's a shaft that runs through the generator here, and over here is where the gears are. They don't have a belt on it, it's all gear driven for the timing and everything like that. So of course here you have your coil, and here you have your cutoff for your generator. Of course this is the distributor here, and I'll show you what I did. I put electronic points on, or electronic ignition on here, because it had dual points, and the dual points were very hard to get to synchronize. And it was just a simple replacement, just basically unscrew the points, take off the rotor cap, and then you put this donut on the shaft underneath the rotor, and you just bolt the sensor in here, and you wire it up, and it improved the performance tremendously in this car. I mean, it would be easy enough to convert back to dual points. You know, I save all my parts and stuff like that, and so if somebody wanted to go back, they can, and it doesn't really do anything to disturb the originality look of the engine. Let me see if I can get this back together here. Now also, if you look at this, here's on the bottom here is the tube that comes out of the bottom of the radiator, and there's a drain plug over here where you can drain the coolant out. Back here we have the oil filter. Actually, this is a reproduction oil filter that is, because you can't get these canisters anymore, and even if you find a used one, they're awful expensive. So this is a reproduction canister that actually has a spin-on filter so that you can use a modern filter. Down here is a starter, and basically you have a pedal inside the car that's hooked up to this linkage, and you step on that and that'll turn the starter over. Back here is a cover that opens up and for the flywheel, and on the flywheel is the marks for timing, so you can advance the spark and get your timing set up. Now if you look on the engine here, there's a lot of places where you have to oil, and you know they want I think every 500 miles or something like that, they want you to oil the car and also grease it. So it is a lot of maintenance to keeping these engines, you know, working properly. But up here on the firewall, you can see we've got an oil can installed, and that was standard on all the cars. They have an oil can, so every few times you take it off, you can re-oil it. What I have done here, if you'll notice, there's some new paint and some old paint. Well, what I did is replace or I shouldn't say replace, but I took the head off, and I had the valves, new valves put in, stainless steel valves and seats, so that it'll run a lot easier on the modern gas. I mean, basically the engine is pretty simple to work on. The only difficulties is that you have to bend over pretty far to get at it. And although the side mounts were an accessory to the cars, it does make it very difficult to get down underneath there. You really have to bend over to get, you know, at the lower part of the engine. So then on the front, in the cold weather, what we have is dampers in the front of the engine, and actually there's a thermostat here that opens and closes the dampers as the engine heats up, or I should say as the water heats up. So that's it for this side of the car. We can go around and look at the other side, and I'll explain some more things over there. Okay, here we are on the driver's side of the car, and we'll go through the parts over on this side. Here's one of those water distribution tubes that I was talking about, that we're making another one of these in one of our videos. Of course, here you have the horn. Then you have your intake manifold and then your exhaust manifold. It's funny that your exhaust comes out the front. For some reason, on these older cars, a lot of times they did come off the front of the manifold. And then across here is a heating tube. So what they would do is, there's a butterfly valve in here, and it would redirect the hot air, exhaust air over through this here, which acted like a heat exchanger. It's actually got tubes in there where the fuel mixture would go through, and the hot gases would come around it, and then they would come back this way to preheat the air and fuel mixture, you know, when it was cold out. Since I just drive this car in the summer, you know, we're not worried about cold weather. So basically all I did was just stick a regular tube in here without the inner tube, because there would be an outer and inner tube here originally, and I blanked this off so no exhaust gases can get into the carburetor area and mix with the fuel and air mixture. Now down here, a lot of people would say that this is an air filter, but it actually isn't an air filter. This is just a baffle so that in case the car backfires, you do not have flames shooting out of your carburetor. And that's what that is for. There's no filter medium in there whatsoever. It just acts like a baffle, and it pulls the fresh air in and it won't let the flames come shooting out. And here is your choke. This here is for your idle. You adjust this here on the steering wheel. There's a lever, excuse me, that you can adjust the idling speed of the car. And then the carburetor is a two barrel carburetor. It has idling jets and it has acceleration jets. Now there really is no adjustment on this carburetor once it's set. The only thing that you can adjust on this is your float level in your bowl here. So that'll determine the level of the gasoline in the jets. So once you've got that set properly, you do not adjust it. Now you look to the back here. Now this looks like a knob that you can screw in and out, but actually you don't screw it in and out. Once you've got this set to the right height, there's a spring in there and also a linkage in there that goes to a pair of butterfly valves inside the carburetor. That what happens is when you accelerate, that butterfly valve automatically opens up and feeds more gas and air mixture to the engine, which makes it run faster. The place where you do your acceleration is actually these butterfly valves here. And here is for this linkage here is for adjusting your heater, your preheating. That doesn't do anything. This one here from your accelerator pedal, you can see is how you step on the gas and it goes up. The butterfly valves open up all the way. Down here is where you have your controls for your lights. On the steering wheel there's a lever that turns, and this is a switch inside here where you have your dim lights, your regular headlights, and your high beams. So, and then over here, we get over here, and of course this is your fuel pump. Right now I do not have it hooked up to the gas tank because it's all drained out, and I've got an auxiliary pump, or excuse me, auxiliary tank here that I use to run it, or try to run it. I haven't gotten it running yet, but we're working on that. And I think I got an electrical issue in here. So I'm going to have to go through that and check that out. Because as you can see, the bowl is completely dry. So I had pumped out all the gas out of it and out of the carburetor, and when we start getting that running, I'll have to get all that filled back up. This little cap here is the breather cap for the crankcase, and that's about all I have to show you on this side. Maybe if Jared wants to, we can go in the interior and I can show you the controls on the dashboard, and we can talk about what they're all about. All right, here we are looking at the inside of the 31 Buick. If you look at the upholstery is mohair. It wears good over age, but starting to wear out now. It's starting to show its age. So I'll keep running it as long as it doesn't look too terrible, and then I'll have to replace it. If you look up here at the top here above the windshield, this is a crank that raises and lowers the windshield. What happens is, on hot days, what you do is you raise the windshield all the way up, you open up the side vents down here on the cowling, and the air comes behind the dashboard. It flows behind the dashboard and out these air vents. So what it's doing is removing all the heat that's transferred from the engine compartment. And if you roll down the windows, you know, it stays very nice and comfortable in here. And then also here, this lever here, little lever here, is for the windshield wipers. The windshield wipers work on vacuum, and I don't have the engine running now, so we can't show you how they work, but they do work. And of course here you got your rear view mirror. Now we go down to the steering wheel here. I was showing you different things in the engine compartment as far as switches and the idle. This knob here adjusts my idle on the car. So when I go to start it, you know, I can put it at full idle and start the engine up, and it'll run, and I can adjust it as needed. This down here is actually the light switch. So I go this way, and you know, it goes through a pattern of 3 different positions. This here is off, and it'll turn the cowling lights on, the headlights on, the high beams, low beams, and that. On the dash here, this here I was talking about preheating the air and gas mixture. This lever here does that. And like I say, I don't use it, so basically it's in that position all the time. You got your oil pressure here. Usually we run about 30 pounds oil pressure. Water temperature, usually we run about 180 degrees water pressure. Here you have your speedometer. Your speed's up here, your mileage is down here. This here is the choke. So you adjust that, you know, according to how hot the engine is. And actually, if the engine starts to overheat, actually you give it a little bit more choke, and that'll help drive down the temperature. This here is actually your spark, and it's for retarding your spark. This over here is your gas gauge, and actually this works on a unique system. It's not electric. It actually works on a pressure system. There's a capillary line that runs from here back to the gas tank, and there's a liquid that you put in there, and depending upon the level in the gas tank, it pushes the level of that fluid up and down almost like a thermometer. Generally these don't work very well. I mean, I've never had one working on my cars, so I just have to check them with a stick every once in a while to see how much gas is in it. Over here is your amp gauge. And generally when I'm driving, you know, I'll be going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, depending upon the cutout switch that I showed you on top of the generator. This here is actually the dash lights. So you can turn the dash lights on. We don't have a battery in here at this point, so that's not working. This here actually is a lighter. And it's kind of unique. None of my other cars have it, and it looks like it might have been a factory accessory that was added to the car, because the bracket is made to fit exactly on the dashboard, and it just clamps on. So that's kind of a neat thing to have. Down here we have our emergency brake, and I've had to use these a few times going down a hill and trying to stop. So this will lock up all 4 brakes, or try to lock up all 4 brakes, I should say. And so that's handy, because I'll end up stepping on the brake and pulling that when I get a little nervous. Here we have a 3-speed transmission. It has a synchro from 3rd to 2nd. And once in a while I'll find myself trying to downshift into 1st, which doesn't make a very good sound. But generally, you know, you're basically using 2nd and 3rd. I mean, 1st is kind of like a granny gear. I mean, you could shift out when you take off from stops. You can shift into 2nd gear within 50 feet. And sometimes I've already taken off from a stop by mistake in 2nd gear. So the engine does have a lot of torque to it. Back then, that was the big thing, is having torque. And a straight 8-cylinder gives you a lot of torque. Down here is the starter pedal that I showed you where the starter is. You push that in and it energizes the starter. Here's the accelerator pedal, of course. This is the brake pedal. Now we have all mechanical brakes on this car. So that's why sometimes you have to pull the emergency brake. This over here is your clutch pedal, and it works fine. Now, when I was talking about the airflow, if you look over here, these are these cowling vents that I was talking about. And what happens is you just pull this, it's in the open position now, you push it back, and it's closed. One of the other neat things that I ended up finding at a swap meet for this car was a radio. And so this is the radio that I have that I'm going to be putting into this car. And I thought it said Buick on it, unless that came apart on there, that decal. Huh. Oh yeah, it says Buick right down here. It says Buick. So I think this is kind of a unique extra thing to have on the car. I mean, my other 2 cars came with radios. I ended up taking them out and getting rid of them because of the fact that when you install a radio or a heater, they take up so much legroom underneath the dashboard that I didn't feel the need. Generally, like I said, I don't drive this in the wintertime, so I don't need a heater. So that was easy enough to eliminate. And the radios, you know, they're tube radios and they're old and their reception isn't that good. So I didn't think I really needed them. I really don't listen to the radio when I drive these cars. But because this one had a Buick emblem on it, I kept this one and will be installing it eventually. And on the seat here, I've got a lot of extra parts for this car when we get around to working on it. Down here in the floor, I got the floorboard out because we pulled the battery out. And we'll be doing some more work on this eventually. But since I've got so many cars, it's hard to decide what one to work on. And usually I take the easiest one, the easiest route. So that's it for the inside of this car.